One of the first questions that people get concerned about, was it Friday or was it Wednesday? And let me say right up front, there are many good scholars that will support a Friday crucifixion. That is the traditional view of the church. I can remember vividly, I was a co-host on a worldwide television broadcast, and we had as our guest, the guest that was scheduled at that time was Dr. John Warwick Montgomery, the famous apologist. And my associate host got in a discussion with him about where he was explaining how you get 3 days and 3 nights between Friday and Sunday. And John Warwick Montgomery, this very august apologist, was defending the Friday thing. When he finished, I turned to the co-host and explained, I says, you need to understand that John is also an attorney, and that's the way they bill. And Dr. Montgomery almost fell off the couch laughing because he knew I was pulling his leg. I knew a lot about him because he was such a close friend with Walter Martin, and Walter and I were very close. But indeed, eminent scholar, and he would defend a Friday, but they all try to argue various ways that a partial day counts as a day, and that's how they get the 3 days from Friday to, and I'm saying that because there are people that still, it's not just a church tradition, there are people that will try to support that. But there are 3 reasons why I don't think that is correct from the scripture. We mentioned last time that he went from Jericho to Bethany 6 days before Passover, which means, in effect, that Passover could not be on a Friday, because you wouldn't be, 6 days before that would be a Shabbat, and that's from Jericho to Bethany is more than a Sabbath day's journey. And as an observant Jew, he would not violate that Shabbat. There's another verse, and that is the morning we call Easter morning, when the girls were going to the tomb with their spices and things. It says, after the Sabbaths were passed. Your English Bible may or may not notice this, but in the Greek it's very clear, it's plural. The Sabbaths were passed that Sunday morning, which means there was more than one Sabbath. On the Jewish calendar, there are 52 Shabbats, that is what we call Saturdays. There are also 7 high Sabbaths in addition, one of which is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, the day after Passover. Passover itself is not considered a Sabbath, but the day after is in the formal reckoning. So the fact that Sunday morning there was more than one Sabbath passed means that not only Saturday had passed, but either Thursday or Friday was the Feast of Unleavened Bread. When the Sabbaths were passed, they were free to go to the thing. So that, again, is a refutation of a Friday crucifixion. And the one that's also the third thing is Jesus himself said, as Jonah spent 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so shall the Son of Man spend 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. And the way that's expressed seems to reject it being simply idiomatical. 3 days and 3 nights is clearly, you can't shoehorn that in between Friday evening and Sunday morning. It doesn't work, so much as you might try. So we hold, doesn't mean we're right, I just want you to know where we're coming from as we go through some of these other discussions. So 6 days before Passover, he came to Bethany in John chapter 12, and more than a Sabbath day's journey from Jericho, and 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth in Matthew 12, verse 40. Okay, so those are 3 reasons. So Friday, we see him at Bethany from John 12. Saturday, we have the triumphal entry by this reckoning. And there's different scholars will have slightly different resting. We've leaned heavily on the very interesting work by Rister Salata that's been finally translated into English, and it's a very excellent reconciliation of much of this. Sunday is when the fig tree is cursed and so forth. Monday is when the conspirators counsel together. And I want to point out something to you. The plan by the conspirators expressly was not to take Jesus on a holiday, because they feared the Romans. The Romans almost didn't care what you do as long as you did it orderly. Their report card to Caesar gets punched by whether or not there's an insurrection. So the Romans were very tight in keeping things peaceful. They couldn't care less about the other controversies. The conspirators wanted to take Jesus on a non-holiday. That was the plan. And I think it's very, very fascinating that Jesus controlled all the details. And at the upper room, it's Jesus that announces that someone's going to betray him. So you have to understand the spot that put Judas in. He wasn't going to do it that night. It's Passover the next day. You got to be kidding. But Jesus announces that someone's going to be, who's going to betray him? The one that dips with me in the sop. He turns to Judas and says, what you do quickly. Who's calling the shots here? Jesus is. I think that's fascinating. Judas has to fish or cut bait. He's got to do it that night or the word's out. So he splits. He's got to find the co-conspirators. They've got to make arrangements. They've got to get an appointment with Pilate early in the morning. There's a whole bunch of things. That's why they're in Gethsemane so long. It took them that long to get their act together. Jesus is calling the shots, interestingly enough. And of course, we have the Last Supper, which is, and of course, the Passover lamb was between the evenings, and that's so it starts at the sundown. It goes to sundown the next day, and he'll be crucified before sundown the next day. And so there we have it. And it fascinates me that it is controlled by Jesus Christ. This chronology would support a Wednesday crucifixion, as we see, and when you put John 19 and Mark 15 and Luke 23 together, that seems to be the profile, if you will. And then, of course, we have the next day is the Feast of Unleavened Bread, as specified in Leviticus 23. And then Friday is when the women prepare the spices and so forth. And Saturday, they in rest. And it's after the Sabbaths were passed. In Matthew 28, verse 1 is a very key verse. Check it in the Greek. You'll discover it's plural. And that's important to get an insight here. And of course, Sunday morning, they discover he's risen. Now, there's some scholars that would argue that he actually was resurrected that night, obviously before sunrise. And that's splitting hairs in my view. The net of it is that clearly Sunday morning, the women discover, it's interesting, the women discover that he is risen. And the apostles learn about it subsequently. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But that's a quick profile. It's one of the candidate reckonings of the final week, the so-called Passion Week of Jesus Christ. And